Welcome to this explainer on the surviving philosophical corpus of Archelaus Athenios. Now, you might initially think of this text as just some transitional historical footnote, but actually, scratch that. It is the definitive teleological conclusion of the onus physiologoi. In these specific fragments, we're witnessing something absolutely crucial, the exact intellectual fracture where the Hellenic mind stops looking outward at the cosmos and turns violently inward to interrogate human society. It's literally the structural blueprint that permanently closed the pre-Socratic era of isolated natural philosophy. It took the center of intellectual gravity and dropped it right into the Attic heartland. By rigorously examining this corpus today, we're going to uncover the foundational mechanics of classical ethical theory. We'll see firsthand the precise moment ancient thought completely decoupled human morality from the physical laws of the universe.
Okay, here's our roadmap for this dialectical progression. We'll start with the introduction and thematic thesis, move into the historical and cultural context, and then look at the literary composition and style. After that, we'll break down the ethical and philosophical framework, trace the dialectical progression of arguments, and finally wrap up with the text transmission and enduring legacy.
Section 1. Introduction and Thematic Thesis.
So, prior to this ancient text, intellectual inquiry was, pretty much consumed by meteorological and astronomical phenomena. The older cosmological models just assumed there was this unified naturalistic order that could explain literally everything. But here's where it gets interesting. The text of Archelaus forcefully argues that external observation alone is entirely insufficient for regulating human conduct. The author systematically dismantles the whole idea that the physical universe gives us any intrinsic moral compass. By formally concluding that celestial bodies and atmospheric elements possess zero ethical properties, this academic work acts as the absolute endpoint of natural philosophy as an isolated discipline. It isolates human behavior as a completely separate category of study, which plants the inescapable seeds for the ethical frameworks that would absolutely dominate the classical era. We are looking at the exact boundary line of two distinct intellectual epochs. It effectively bankrupts that old physical obsession to lay down the necessary foundation for an ethical revolution.
Section 2. Historical and cultural context. Now, the historical record really reflects the inherent tension of this transition. You'll notice these biographical contradictions surrounding the author, like the disputes over whether he originally came from Athene or Miletos, or if his paternal lineage belongs to Apollodos or Mithon. Well, those aren't just historical accidents. They represent the ontological tension of a philosophical system caught entirely in transit. Archelaus is positioned dynamically right on the timeline between his predecessor Anaxagoras and his successor, Socrates. He represents a dying Ionian tradition born out in the colonial peripheries of the Eastern Aegean. Yet his own text shows an intellectual system violently mutating just to survive within the dense socio-political reality of an emerging urban empire. It's a direct product of geopolitical transit, completely mirroring the movement of complex abstract thought from the shores of Ionia straight into the highly regulated, deeply structured political epicenter of the classical mainland.
Section 3. Literary Composition and Style.
Let's dive into the structural architecture of the physicos tradition within this text because it operates through a severe mechanical reductionism. Archelaus isolates two violently active principles, the thermon and the psychron. And to be clear, in this text, these aren't just passive temperatures. No way. They are aggressive, kinetic aitia, primary causes. The author synthesizes these physical forces to construct a startlingly materialist origin theory. He posits that their collision generates this primordial mud, and from that mud, all animal life spontaneously emerges. But notice what's missing here. There is a profound stylistic and conceptual void right at the center of this hypothesis, the absolute absence of divine intervention. It is a strictly mechanical cosmos. By reducing the origin of life entirely to the fluid dynamics and brutalist interaction of the thermon and psychron, the text actively clears the board of any mythological oversight. This purely materialist composition establishes the rigorous, empirical baseline you absolutely need to analyze human institutions without getting tangled up in traditional theological assumptions.
Section 4. Ethical and Philosophical Framework.
This is where things get really fascinating. Archelaus advances this radical thesis that concepts like the dikeion, the kolon, and their binary opposite, the achiron, possess absolutely zero ontological reality in physis. Think about that for a second. The physical universe, that realm of primordial mud, elemental collisions, and biological generation we just talked about, does not contain inherent justice or morality. Instead, the author argues that these ethical virtues are entirely constructed by nomos. They're just human agreements, artificial boundaries engineered solely to sustain societal structures.
By completely divorcing human morality from the natural laws of the cosmos, the text forces this massive reevaluation of how an individual interacts with the state. The virtues being championed here are part of a functional, socially constructed ethics, not some naturally occurring truth. This stark dichotomy between what is real by nature and what is mandated by human convention forms the precise conceptual gap that Archelaus exploits to fundamentally rewrite the baseline of ancient ethics.
Section 5. Dialectical progression of arguments. So, previously, thinkers like Thales and Anaximandros sought the ultimate truth in the apeiron, or a singular elemental arche. But the rigorous logical progression of Archelaus completely abandons this search. The text demonstrates that if the dikeion and the kalon originate strictly from nomos, then human legal frameworks must operate entirely independently of those cosmic elements. As we move dialectically from raw material generation to engineered law, the text methodically proves that the societal baseline for justice is just a cultural binary. It's an autonomous authority generated entirely by human consensus, not derived from the stars. This dialectical maneuver is a real game changer. It permanently removes ethics from the laboratory of nature and drops it squarely into the court of human opinion. It establishes a progressive internal logic where human laws are the ultimate, localized authority, entirely responsible for their own validity and enforcement.
Section 6. Transmission and enduring legacy.
When we look at the historical preservation of this text, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Archelaus is the silent, indispensable progenitor of classical ethical philosophy. Sure, the broader historical narrative often credits his successor with inventing the rigorous study of human ethics, but the textual evidence confirms it was actually Archelaus who provided the exact categorical blueprint. It was this specific, documented realization that measuring the stars and theorizing about mud cannot yield the laws of human conduct that directly fueled the subsequent Socratic revolution. This corpus stands as the definitive bridge. It received the mechanical science of the East, processed its materialist implications, and refined it into the political and moral philosophy of the West. Its lasting impact on the history of literature is exactly this: the successful, brilliant translation of a physical crisis into an ethical foundation.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought. If this ancient secular text holds true, if the foundations of the dikeion are entirely decoupled from physis and exist strictly as artifacts of human convention, how do we anchor objective moral truth within the artificial architecture of our modern polis? This is an interrogation that began the moment the Hellenic mind first realized the cosmos is utterly silent on human justice. Archelaus demonstrated that nature provides us with life, sure, but it does not provide us with law. And that realization forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that our societal frameworks, our very definitions of right and wrong, rest entirely on our own engineered agreements. It's a rigorous academic challenge that started over 2 millennia ago, and quite frankly, it continues to demand our absolute critical attention today.